Picture this. You're sitting at a high-stakes poker table, and the pot in the center is massive. Like, maybe it represents the entire geopolitical landscape of the ancient world, or, maybe it's a glittering promise of the American dream. So you look down at your hands, and you're holding absolutely nothing. A pair of twos, which is pretty much the worst hand that you could possibly have. When playing at this level, if you want to win, you can't just bluff the other player. You need to convince yourself, And if you let even a tiny little bit of reality into your consciousness, your hands begin to shake, your palms become clammy, and to pull off the ultimate bluff, you need to convince yourself that you're holding a royal flush. This level of self-deception is what we are going to take apart today. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Literary Vault, the show where we analyze and compare classic literature. I'm your host, Ophélia Miller, and today we will be discussing identity and duality through the play Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. 3 completely different worlds, right? But across all these novels, there is one theme that is constant, which is identity and duality. Let's start with the setup, because before the characters can even play the game, they have to invent the persona they are bringing to the table. They have to build that royal flush out of nothing. And nobody in American literature builds a persona quite like J. Gatsby. Because, he wasn't even born a millionaire, and he's throwing these extravagant parties on the West Egg, and everybody in New York is coming, and he's acting like it's no big deal. He is a poor kid, and his name was James Gatz. He was on a poor farm in North Dakota, and at the age of 17, he sees Dan Cody's yacht, and he decides to help him. That is the turning point. The yacht represents every ounce of beauty and glamour in the world to him, and that in that specific instance, James Gatz mentally ceases to exist. Nick has a really good quote, which I'm going to read, and he explains that the truth was that J. Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. That's in chapter 6, and this quotation suggests that J. Gatsby intentionally invents a version of himself based on his dream rather than reality. He isn't putting a mask to trick Dan Cody. He is rewriting his own reality. He believes in his own story deeply because it's fueled by extraordinary gift of hope. He wants to be with Daisy. So going back to our poker metaphor, if Gatsby leaves even a sliver of North Dakota dirt into his mind, his hands would become to shake. He had fully deceived himself with his Oxford man persona to keep the bluff alive. This level of self-deception is a dangerous foundation for an identity. Now, let's contrast that on a heavy level of self-deception with the way Oscar Wilde handles reinvention in The Importance of Being Earnest. This is a completely different vibe. Wilde gives us the comedic inversion of this. So, the characters such as Jack and Algernon, their reinvention is just a tool to escape social constraints. They aren't changing their full personality. Like they're saying they're earnest to Gwendolyn and Cecily, but inside they know they are still their real name by saying like, oh, couldn't you love the name Jack, or couldn't you love the name Algernon? So they know who they are inside. And this whole concept of Bunbury, invented by Algernon, is an ill friend named Bunbury who lives in the country. So whenever Algernon wants to get out of social obligation, he claims poor Bunbury is sick and he just has to rush to his bedside. And Jack does the exact same thing, but in reverse. Jack lives in the country and has invented a wicked brother named Ernest who lives in London. So Jack uses Ernest as an excuse to go to the city and behave terribly while still maintaining his reputation as a strict moral guardian back home. So Wilde's character are treating reinvention like they're playing the slots, when you go to the casino, and it's just for a weekend thrill. But Gatsby has pushed all his chips in the center of the table, and Jack and Algernon know they're bluffing, and they're just enjoying their bluff. But Gatsby has hypnotized himself almost into believing his own bluff. This brings us to the public and private lives of Antony and Cleopatra. Rome represents this calculated and public duty, so that's their public life. And Antony is one of the three men running this world. And he is feeling a lot of pressure because right now he's negliging this world and he is not taking it seriously because he's fooling around with Cleopatra. So to cement his political alliances, he goes to marry Caesar's sister, Octavia, which is a total political chess move. But then you have Egypt. Egypt represents private desire, passion, and everything the Roman despise. Antony is playing two entirely different games at once. He tries to play a ruthless game of political chess in Rome while playing a passionate, high-stakes game in Egypt. He marries Octavia, but in his heart, he is tied to Cleopatra. I mean, can anyone actually sustain two entirely different games simultaneously? That is the core conflict of the whole play. And Philo, who is a Roman soldier and a loyal friend to Mark Antony, tells us that right at the beginning of the play. He says, "Triple pillar of the world is transformed into a strumpet's fool." And we can link this exact same struggle right back to Gatsby. Gatsby is torn between the dirty reality of criminal underworld. I mean, he's associated with Mr. Wolfsheim, the guy who fixed the 1919 World Series, and he's balancing his romantic quest to win Daisy's heart through his parties. He's trying to merge mud with stars, which is practically impossible to do. And all of this is to say that you can't play two games at once or bluff with a pair of twos for so long. Eventually, everything starts to crumble. So let's look at the collapse of Gatsby. So Gatsby, Tom Buchanan, Jordan, Daisy, Nick Carraway, they all go to New York to breathe fresh air because right now the atmosphere is pretty tense. And Tom Buchanan just decides to rip the Band-Aid off and reveal Gatsby persona piece by piece. He goes right to the throat. It's not not afraid to embarrass Gatsby because he pretty much despises him because he's taking away his wife, right? And he calls Gatsby Mr. Nobody from nowhere and exposing him in front of Daisy. And Daisy's response, she's just terrified, and she does love Gatsby, but she can't admit that she never loved Tom because she did marry him. So a part of her did have to love Tom at some point. And she retreats into her money, and Tom and Daisy, they retreat into their carelessness, leaving Gatsby with nothing. At the end of the novel, Gatsby dies, waiting for a phone call from Daisy that never comes. And at his funeral, it's completely empty. Nobody shows up. Well, actually, there is a couple people. There's his father, who I ironically still call him Jimmy Gats, which means his whole persona, everything that he put up, it's not remembered because his dad still remembers him as the little boy that was poor from North Dakota. And there's also Owl Eyes, and of course his friend Nick Carraway that shows up to the funeral. But that's pretty much it. And as Nick Carraway said it so well, so I'm just going to repeat it, Gatsby paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. Finally, the collapse of Antony is just devastating. He's torn by his dual loyalties and finally decides to make the choice to follow Cleopatra's fleeing ship. Oh man, the play just describes him as a dotting mallard, and he completely loses his honor, his mind, and the tragedy ultimately ends in a double suicide. But even that goes wrong. Antony botches his own death. He falls on his sword, and it's being dragged out because he's not dying. He kind of like messed it up. And his final words are, "I'm dying, Egypt, dying." Just brutal, right? And then Cleopatra chooses to be bitten by an asp over being paraded as a Roman trophy. Pretty brutal, right? So, moral of the story, kids, don't pretend to be dead. Don't cry wolf, right? So, what does this all mean? Well, the ultimate consequence of maintaining a dual life is that it must eventually collapse. It has to fall apart, whether it's resolved into irony as we can see it in Ernest, or just a devastating tragedy as in Gatsby and Antony and Cleopatra. The divided self just cannot survive the truth because, let's be honest, the truth always wins. And this brings us back to you guys, the listeners. We all wear masks, right? And sometimes we bluff our way through our careers, our personal lives, and we act like we have the world flush when actually we're just holding a pair of twos. And adopting these different identities might provide temporary success or freedom, sure, to let you through the door, but these literary texts prove that living a divided life ultimately forces a brutal confrontation with the truth. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us on this deep dive, and we hope that it gave you some amazing new perspective to think about. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration, and until then, keep questioning the narrative.